want to thank you very much. I am honored to be at our own local TV station. I would like to start with a statement of Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor himself. He said, "For the survivor who choose to testify, it is clear that their duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. They have no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to our collective memory. To forget would be not only dangerous, but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time." So I will relate you about my childhood under Nazi occupation in the Netherlands. I was born in 1933, and I started with a very nice sheltered life with my parents, my little sister, and 10 years later, 2 little brothers. Like all the children in Holland, we did a lot of bike riding in the summer, ice skating on the frozen canals in the winter, attending school and playing with friends until May 10, 1940, when Germany invaded the Netherlands. On May 14, Holland surrenders. They immediately installed a German governor of the Netherlands. His name was Arthur Seyss-Inquart, who was a hardline Nazi extremist who later was sentenced to death, judged and sentenced to death in Nuremberg. He immediately imposed the enforced conformity, the systematic elimination of all our cultural and public values in order to make the Dutch country part of the Nazi Third Reich. All the Netherlands political parties were outlawed. Dutch association and clubs like Rotary, Freemasons were all forbidden. Within hours, freedom of speech, freedom of the press were suspended, followed by broadcasting services. We only were allowed to hear the German, the Nazi, I would say Nazi radio propaganda. We had to bring our own radios to the Gestapo headquarters in order not to be able to hear Radio London, where we could hear what was really happening in the war. Very soon there became a curfew. Nobody was allowed in the streets after 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. next morning. All our correspondence was opened and controlled. It did not all happen at once, but very gradually, so much that people thought it will go back to normal, which unfortunately did not happen. We had to darken all our windows with black paper or any other means because no light could be seen from the air. That was because every night hundreds of Royal Air Force planes from England came over our country to bombard Germany. And since we were an occupied Nazi, we also were enemy territory. The sirens warned when the raids and the bombing were starting, and people refuge in basements, in public shelters, wherever they could. We lived in darkness and fear. March 1941, the Nazis issued ID cards for the population. The Jews had theirs stamped with a big J and were obliged to wear the yellow David star. Jews had no right to own business or to use telephones. All public transportation was void to them. They were expelled from all the public employments. Only could shop between 3 o'clock and 5 p.m. in the afternoon. They also were forbidden to enter the home of non-Jews. Jewish children were banished from all the public schools. All of a sudden, we had our friends telling us, yeah, we are going to travel, we're going to stay with my aunt. They were going in hiding, but we didn't know. They could not tell us. My father was outraged with the Nazis' behavior and started hiding Jewish people from the very beginning, in spite of the Nazis having warned that whomever helped a Jew would be treated like one. I remember the names of at least 10 people who came to our house. Not all at the same time, because my father brought them to other addresses. It was all a security business. But for us children, we did not even know their right names. They were just uncles and aunts. It was a challenge to hide so many people in your house. And because of the Nazis, they said, let us know when anybody helps a Jew. And you could not even trust your neighbors anymore. We were very much involved as children because my parents every day recommended, don't talk about the aunts and uncles here at home with nobody, not even with your best friends. And you know, when you're a kid, you want to tell your best friends what's happening. Every day my parents reminded us how dangerous it was. Our life is like a description of Anne Frank's life. We were frozen with fear when we heard a truck stopping in the streets. Massive deportation of the Jews from the Netherlands started on a daily basis. The Nazis frequently raided all the houses in our neighborhood and brought out the people, separated families. There was a lot of crying and screaming. We didn't even know what was happening because the Nazis said, no, we are going to take them to labor. There will be jobs for everybody and the children will be fed well, they will be better off. Several times they came to our house, but my father had made a hiding place in the attic. We had a big box for the coal to warm us in the winter, and my father had made a false bottom, so there was a little space where they could go in hiding. And at the door, our door was downstairs once, and when we saw or heard soldiers, we had a little knob, and to warn the people upstairs, go into hiding. The scariest moment in my life was one morning. I woke up. My father was standing next to my bed with what seemed to be a giant soldier, armed from head to toe, and just at my eye level, he had big hand grenades in his boots. And just a couple of days before, they had made a demonstration of the damage that hand grenades could do. It was very scary. My grandfather, father, uncles were all in the resistance. We called it the underground. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes your duty. Since the Gestapo confiscated all the radios, the Dutch started hiding radios in attic, anywhere they could. My grandfather was the one who could listen to Radio London, and he made little notes for his friends of what really happened in the war. Since it was dangerous for a grown man to go in the streets, because the Nazis could take him to labor camps, not concentration camps, but labor camps, my grandfather said, you kids are going to help us. We had those little scooters, you can go in the street. and my grandfather made little rolls with the news. And he said, you guys go, put it in the handlebar of your little scooter, and you have to go to that and that address. Repeat with me. Repeat. You have to talk to Mr. Jansen. Mr. Jansen, yes. If Mr. Jansen is not there, don't give it to his wife, to his brother, to his children, to nobody. Only Mr. Jansen in person. And when the people ask you, why do you want to talk to Mr. Jansen? Just tell them, my grandfather wants to talk with him. So that is how we became involved very actively, even being kids. We needed food stamps or coupons for everything and everybody. Rationing was another way that the Nazis had to control the population. Since the people hidden in our house were non-existent, we needed food stamps for them also. So my father started working at the food stamp organization, and together with other resistance, they started falsifying coupons. It was difficult to get the necessary food for everybody without being suspect. There were always people on the look to tell the Nazis about any unusual movement. On June 8, 1944, that was just 6 days after my birthday, the Gestapo came back to our house. This time, it were not even soldiers in uniform, but some Dutch people in plain clothes. I was ready to go to school. I opened the door. I saw civilians, so I didn't even think about the people upstairs. I said, those are Dutch people. And I asked them, what do you want? They said, IRS. I came up, my mother came along and said, what's happening here? I said, IRS. My mother said, let me see your badge, just let me see. They pushed my mother aside. She fell on the floor, and I went immediately upstairs and brought the two people who were just, or two uncles who were just there at that time. They brought everybody to the living room. And then I asked my mother, where's your husband? She said, well, my husband is working. I can call him. They said, no, give us his telephone number. And what's the name of your doctor? My doctor is Dr. Dubois. So one of the guys called my father's office and said, this is Dr. Dubois. Mr. Perbal has to come home immediately because the oldest of the two babies is dying. When I heard that, I thought, I will pretend I go to school and I will go to the streetcar stop and tell my father, don't come home. So I said, sir, I have to leave. If not, I will be late for school. And I have to. I said, nobody leaves the house. A little later, my father came in and looked at my mother, who had my little brother on her lap, and had hit him in the face and saying, don't give signs to your wife. We will tell you why you are here. So then my father and the two uncles have been taken away, and they were taken to, in our own street, there was a school that became the headquarters of the Gestapo. We were, my mother and 4 children, we were left there. It was a miracle because all the Jewish families, they took everybody, mothers, fathers, babies. But because we were not Jewish, they only took my father, who had done what he did, helping the Jews. We were totally lost. My mother didn't know what to do. Next day, they came back with moving trucks, and they confiscated everything we had. They emptied the house. So there we were, not knowing what to do. The resistance helped us to find a little apartment, and we had to borrow a mattress and a table and a chair from friends and family. With our food stamps, we only could buy some potatoes, a matchbox-size quantity of butter, a cup of sugar and flour and bread per person per month. Meat and eggs were only available at the black market and for exorbitant prices. There was no soap, only kind of a bar of clay that we used like so. The water, we only had it an hour per day, so many people got sick. They got skin diseases like scabies and mange because there was no hygiene. Not only food and medicine were scarce, but everything else also. We had no fabric, we had no clothes, we had no leather to repair the soles of our shoes. So I remember that we had to put cardboard in the shoes to go further with them, or then the upper part of leather was nailed to a wooden sole so we could still use the shoes. On September 5th, 1944, D-Day happened, the invasion in Normandy. We expected to be liberated very shortly because of the rapid advance of the Allied troops. France, Belgium, and the south of the Netherlands were already liberated. But we in Amsterdam were still in the suffocating grip of the Nazis, who became meaner and meaner every day. The food became even more rare since there was no transport, and anyhow all the shops were empty. We did not imagine that the worst was still to come. The winter of 1944-45 was called the Hunger Winter, and it was the coldest on record. We were starving, had no means to warm our houses, and even the food stamps were worthless since the shops were empty. We only could get at the public kitchen one scoop of a mixture of potato peels, cabbage trunks, and residues of sugar beets. It had no nutritious value whatsoever. The only quality is that it was warm. But before we reached home, it already was cold. The civilian population was very undernourished. And more than once, we saw people dropping dead in the streets from hunger. During that hunger winter, in Amsterdam alone, 2,500 people died, and from the cold, and more than 30,000 all over the occupied part of the country. We survived with what we called wonder stoves. It was a little coffee can with a chimney inside, and on which we could boil a pot with paper, cardboard, or chopped-up furniture, whatever we had available. You could burn a pot. After the boil, my mother used to put the pots in a hay box, a big box of hay with holes in it, put the pot there, a pillow on top, and the heat finished the cooking and kept the food more or less warm until dinner time. That's why I became myself afterwards, when I was already here in the United States, an enthusiastic teacher of solar cooking, because I know the methods. I know what could be done to survive. On May 5, 1945, the Canadians entered in Amsterdam, followed by the Americans. And finally, Germany surrendered. We were free. Everybody was in the streets, dancing, singing, greeting our liberators. And we all wanted to go to the Royal Palace, which was the icon of our own values. But very soon, the resistance warned us, don't go to the Royal Palace. There are still Germans entrenched there, and they shoot everybody that comes near. So a lot of people still lost their life after the Nazis had surrendered. The Dutch brought out all their uniforms, military, police, boys and girls school, all that had been forbidden during the Nazi occupation. There were Dutch flags everywhere, and we wanted all to wear orange, which is the color of our royal house. My mother had a nice silk orange dress that we happily tore apart to make scarf for all of us. Food was still absent. But a few days later, the British Royal Air Force and His Highness Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands started the Operation Manna. Manna, food that coming from heaven. We saw the plane swooping over Amsterdam and dropping packages of food at our airport. We all went to the rooftops and thank you, Alex. We were all starving. Something like 2,800 Lancaster planes dropped more than 6,000 tons of food. In the beginning, we had big tins with crackers and lard. So we said, oh, how delicious. We started putting lard on the crackers, eating. Everybody was so hungry. We were sick. Our organism could not handle that. It was way too much. One very nice thing about this was when I did this presentation in Jackson, one of my friends brought her father-in-law from the United Kingdom. And when he heard the story, he said, I participated of the Operation Manna. I was in the plane, I probably dropped the food, I was the rear gunner. So it was something very special that after 75 years, I could see, thank you, sir. It was very emotional for him as well as for me. And I said to my friend, I'm going to visit your father-in-law, Ron, because I want to bring him some chocolate in memory of the Cadbury that I dropped for us. So the day that I was ready to go visit him, my friend called and she said, you know what? Ron passed away in his sleep. I was very sad. And then one of my friends said, but what a beautiful completion of his life, that somebody hungry that he saved could thank him for it. I never had the courage to, let me see, no, here. Very soon at the football stadium, soccer stadium, football is American, we play soccer. We play football with our feet. Buses came from Germany bringing home the political prisoners. It was absolutely heartbreaking to see those living skeletons still in their ragged blue and gray uniforms. Many of them could not even walk, had to be carried. We went every day with my father's picture, asking, anybody knows him? Anybody saw him? Nobody could help. And we went home in tears. My mother said, there will be more buses tomorrow. He might be there. Unfortunately, it never happened. My two uncles, who also had been deported, came back. They had met my father in Oranienburg and they wanted to stay together. But of course, they had no say over that. And my father was sent to Neuengamme Sandbostel, which was an extermination camp. Later, we heard that my father died on May 13, just a week after the war was over. There were no survivors of that camp because when the Allied troop approached, the Nazis injected typhoid to all the remaining survivors. There are no words to describe the atrocities committed in concentration camps. No films or books come close to reproduce the atmosphere of suffering that still impregnated the walls of those barracks. As soon as the prisoners arrived from the cattle wagons, men and women alike had their heads shaved, all their clothes confiscated, and all their belongings also confiscated. The Nazis wanted the prisoners to feel that they were just numbers that were etched in blue ink in their flesh. They were no longer individuals. No families, no homes, no history. They were just the numbers. That was the best way to dehumanize people. I never had the courage to visit one of those death camps. I only saw a transition camp in Belgium, and I visited the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., and the hiding house of Anne Frank in Amsterdam. At all those venues, the energy is so subdued that people only whisper. People cannot, it was so terrible what they saw. And I always thought, I can handle it. It just was so long ago. I can't. I end up in tears. Using the myth of Aryan superiority or white supremacy, that's how the Nazis became the most cruel murderers of history. Their one-say plan resulted in a mechanic, massive, almost industrial destruction of Jews in concentration camps. The gas chambers and cremation ovens perfectly performed this officially planned and executed system to kill as many victims as possible. The horror of National Socialism and Nazism was not only a Jewish tragedy, it was a crime against humanity. Besides the 6 million murdered Jews, adults and children, in concentration camp, they also killed journalists, intellectuals, handicapped and disabled people, homosexuals, slavish citizens, and Roman are among the 12 million victims whom Hitler saw as lives unworthy to be lived. Also, Germans who opposed the Nazi regime, like Pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and the 20-year-old German student Sophie Scholler, who organized the White Rose Group, were cruelly killed in the concentration and sentenced to death. My father had no intention to be a hero. In his calm way, he always took the right decisions for the circumstances. But he left us a legacy of great courage, humanity, and abnegation, and told us never to be afraid and always to stand up for our principles. After the liberation, I remember my mother saying, "Children, This is a historical moment, the end of World War. We never will have war again. Unfortunately, we never stopped having wars and genocides. What was the lesson I learned from this experience? First of all, never, never, ever give up. This was confirmed by Mitka Kalinsky, a Holocaust survivor I met a couple of years ago at the Rotary Club of Sparks. We had the same age when the war started. His life was far more dramatic than mine because he came through several concentration camps. He also said, never give up, and always keep fighting fascism and similar hateful ideologies. Another survival technique we talked about was to keep your sense of humor. Jokes about the Nazis made us laugh and made us feel better. It is even more surprising that Viktor Frankl, himself a Holocaust survivor, highlights the importance of humor in concentration camps. He explains that it was another of the soul's weapons in the fight for self-preservation. To be honest, it took me years to understand that we never should compromise with intolerance. Right after the war, we were very, very angry with the Germans. It was only later that I understood that wars have no winners. They bring sorrow and destruction on both sides. The German civilians, mostly women, children, and elderly, suffered as much as we did, from bombardments, from hunger, and from even worse than what happened to us. I realized that I never should direct any resentfulness to any group of people, no matter how justified in my eyes. But until today, I have one zero tolerance, and that is for Nazi, neo-Nazi, or swastika flags in the streets of America or any other country. It eludes me how an American can accept to have the name Nazis close to his own name. Just keep in mind that 416,000 Americans, 380,000 British, and 425,000 Canadians brave soldiers gave their life to liberate us from fascism. And many of them, left behind on the endless fields of white crosses as far as the eye can see. We must honor their sacrifice and not let those hateful Nazi flags in our streets. Hatred must be exposed and denounced. It is poison, it corrodes the container that carries it. It perverts, it destroys, and leads to new wars. And there's no victory that ever compensates for the loss of so many young lives. Ben Ferenc, the last Nuremberg prosecutor, said, "Wars make murderers out of otherwise decent people. All wars, all decent people." As a child, my life was completely disrupted, and at a very young age, I became a rebel with the cause. But by now, my message is, let us make sure to be messengers of peace, and to which the only ways are forgiveness and reconciliation. I became a Rotarian, whose aim it is to make the world a better place, and we practice peace through service. I even am a proud member of the Rotary Intercountry Committees that was founded after World War II between France and Germany, two peoples who hated each other more than anything you can explain. But the Rotarians stepped up and said, let's get together, let's sit around a table, eat together, become friends. And after that, they had humanitarian project together. So this is what my childhood was under Nazi occupation. I have a slideshow here, and I would like to show you some of the slides, and you will recognize what I have been talking about. So I was born in 1933. Don't calculate my age, that's not relevant. And I lived a nice life with my father, mother, and my little sister, and then later 2 little brothers. Next. Yes. So as I said, ice skating on the frozen canals and bike riding in the summers. This is my school picture. I was at the same Montessori school as Anne Frank. Not at the same time, because she was 4 years older. And when you're a child, 4 years is a lifetime. And here you see Anne Frank. That's what we did at the beginning of the school. We were sitting nicely with our ink pens and yeah. This is what the New York Times, when the Nazis invaded all our countries. Here you see the geographical position of the Netherlands, because when the Nazis came, we ran away from the cities. We were on the roads. People were so afraid of bombarding. But in the east, and we had the Nazis in the south. They are coming up also, and in the west, we had the North Sea. So we had nowhere to go. So we went back home. We saw German troops arriving everywhere. Tanks, trucks, everywhere, invading the country. People ask me, why didn't Holland fight against the Nazis to liberate you? When you see the enormous war machine of the Germans, we had no way to defend ourselves. Our armament was still from World War I, so there was no other way. We were bulldozed in a couple of days. And they started bombarding the port of Rotterdam, and that's why people run away from the cities, afraid that everything would be bombarded. They, all along the North Sea coast, they built what they called the Atlantic Wall. That was in order to protect them from the British on the other side, and also they thought from there it would be easy to hop over and then invade England also, which fortunately did not happen. We saw Nazi soldiers marching everywhere in our streets. I still can hear the noise of their boots on the pavement and them singing that they were going against England. Next. We had Goebbels, he was the Nazi propaganda minister, and he said, let me control. I don't think he used the word media. Media is something of our times. He used broadcasting, and that is how he controlled all the propaganda of the radios. Next. So within 24 hours, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press were completely suspended. Here you can see the Nazis, even in Germany, they had to bring their shortwave radios to the Gestapo and got only radio distribution with Nazi propaganda. And the Dutch were hiding the radios in the attics and wherever they could. Then the Nazis told our young people, if you are a honored citizen, join the SS. We are the only ones who take care of fatherland and people. There was all propaganda. Unfortunately, many young Dutch went to the SS and perished on the front, of course. So every night we had those searchlights over Amsterdam because of the planes, the British planes that were coming over. The Nazis even had rockets, the V1s, the destination was London, but very often they fell on our place, and we never knew when. When you heard those motors stop, we knew they were going to fall, but we didn't know where. So that was forbidden to have any light coming out of our houses. Yeah, next. We were living in darkness and fear. So this is the Star of David, and with the word Jew in Dutch written on it. People could not go in the street without their stars. And everywhere we saw those signs, forbidden for Jews. That I told you the scary moment when my father woke me up one morning and I saw the German soldier with those hand grenades in his boot, just at my eye height. Yes. And that started every day taking people out of our houses. We were living in a part of Amsterdam where most of the neighbors were Jewish. Yeah. So they rounded up the Jews everywhere, every day. And it was massive deportation. The only thing they were allowed to take was a little what they could carry by hand. And that, as soon as they came to the concentration camp, was confiscated also. The transport in the cattle wagons was so terrible already. They put so many people in those wagons that they had not even a way to sit down or to lay down. They had to stand. Many of them already died during the transport. There was no food, there was no water, there were no way to do any business. Many of them died, crushed by the excess of people in the wagons. There were something like 380 concentration camps all over Germany and adjacent countries. This is a picture of a concentration camp. This is the Neuengamme Sandbostel Stalag, where my father was taken at the end and where he perished. Here you see some prisoners of that same Stalag. And these were the Dutch moving who came and confiscated all we had in our house. They filled 2 trucks. Here you see the little German boys were raised to become the glorious SS officers of the Third Reich. And at the same time, Jewish boys at the same age perished in concentration camp. The children were taken immediately to the gas chambers because they could not work, they couldn't do anything. So Hitler just killed them. That's Elie Wiesel, who, remember, he himself was in a concentration camp and he has seen all that. One of those children was Anne Frank. Here, the dehumanization of prisoners was terrible. They kept them naked in the bitter cold for hours and hours, just pretending that they had to count them over and over again. It was only to break their spirits. And then the final solution was the gas chambers, and the cremation ovens. Those are the coupons that we needed to have our food during the war. And here is the little wonder stove that now in my teaching I call a rocket stove. But that became just, and I knew what you can do with those little things.
Yes.
Here you see the hay basket. I'm putting a pot in the hay basket, boiling, cover it, and the food will be cooked and kept warm. Here you see a family trying to keep warm, nothing to burn in their stove, no shoes, no socks, no clothes to keep warm. And here's people waiting for their soup. Everybody has to go with this little pot. You could not even bring and ask to take the soup for your mother, for your father. Everybody had to go. So also the little children went. That was a soup kitchen, and it was just one scoop of that. We would not even feed that to pigs today. As you can see, the children were terribly undernourished. And more than once we saw people dropping dead in the streets from starvation. This is the official announcement of the Bana Association, the British who came dropping food for the starving Dutch. We saw the Royal Air Force planes over our city and dropping the food at our airport. And all the Dutch grateful on the roof, thank you for the food. And here, that was my meeting with Ron Hampson from the Royal Air Force, who participated to the Operation Mali. That was a very emotional, and I'm so grateful that I had that moment. Absolutely. So here you see the Allied officers coming. The Dutch resistance are the guys with the helmets. They took over because there was no police anymore. The Germans had taken over everything, but now the resistance stepped in. So we finally can fly our own flag again with the orange banner. That was not the one from my mother's dress. That was the real one. I hear the joy of the people at the liberation. Everybody wanted to go on the tanks. You had the Canadians, the Americans who followed, and they had chocolate, they had cigarettes, they had everything that we only could dream about during all those years. Everybody was in the streets. After 5 years of Nazi occupation, it was like heaven opening for us. We wanted everything American. I had to have an American boyfriend, but I was only 12, so nobody was interested to be my boyfriend. I had to wait 70 years for that, but okay. And that is the stencil that the resistance sent us to warn, don't go to the Royal Palace, because the Nazis are entrenched there and they shoot everybody that comes near. So a lot of people still lost their lives after the Nazis already capitulated. So we have memorials everywhere where the Dutch had been shot by the Nazis. These are the pictures of the political prisoners, how they came home from concentration camps. It was absolutely heartbreaking. People cried seeing them. This is the memorial of the war sepulchres, where they brought back all the remains they could identify from the concentration camps, and they have the field of honor, where everybody has just one, a headstone, the name, when they were born and when they died. And I always bring the children to show that. Every year at the memorial behind the headstone, this is the one of my father, they put a person of the same age of the one who died there for the children to realize what really happened. And here, that is an American cemetery. When we saw that, we cried our hearts out. We were thinking about all those young boys. Look at the faces, like children. Many of them lied about their age to go in the army, and they were left behind in those cemeteries. So many of them died, and we should absolutely be careful. Don't let fascism or Nazism take over again. The price is too high. As you can see, those the fields of white crosses are as far as the eye can see. And the school children take care of the headstones at the Field of Honor, and they still have waiting list of Dutch people who want to take care of American or Canadian graves. So you cannot be a proud American and a Nazi. That's impossible, at least in my eyes. And this is a little silver lining because of the Rotary and Lions clubs, the concentration camp where my father perished became a museum for people to remember what happened. And thank you.
We're ever so grateful to Irene Perbal for sharing her amazing life story. For many years, Irene has taught solar cooking all over the world and has now come to realize that she must instead work to ensure that we never forget about the Holocaust and the many life stories, hers being just one. My name is Marty Crane, and as Executive Director of the Volunteer Center of Calaveras County, we have gratefully accepted Irene's challenge. She has donated her vast supply of solar cooking equipment and curriculum to the Volunteer Center, with the understanding and expectation that we will seize every opportunity to share it with the public and anyone who wishes to learn. As Irene showed us in her message today about growing up during Nazi occupation in the Netherlands, also known as Holland, they used something they called a rocket stove to heat the little bit of water they had and cook the severely rationed foods that they were able to acquire. This they did to prevent starvation. As we also saw, many had no shoes or socks, so they used the rocket stove to keep from freezing to death. Disasters happen all over the world. Recently, we heard about the earthquakes in India and Turkey, with the added devastation of affected skyscrapers. We like to think it can never happen here, but the United States is home to many large cities, very much like that. Los Angeles, Sacramento, New York City, and many places in between. Should you, your family, a Boy Scout troop, a Girl Scout troop, your local church or school wish to learn the simple method of solar cooking, you can contact the Volunteer Center of Calaveras County at 209-754-1699. Just leave a message and we'll call you back. It could save your life, your family, and your community. We're the Volunteer Center, and we firmly believe that when community comes together, magic happens. Thank you again to Irene Perbal for sharing this once-in-a-lifetime, first-hand account of her life as a child growing up during World War II and Nazi occupation. Thank you.
Actually is the follow-up from the story of my childhood under Nazi occupation. At this very moment, the horror that happens in Ukraine brought back terrible memories, the same sensation of terror and panic we had when I see all the people on the roads flying. That's what happened with us. That's what we did. We were all on the roads, thousands of people, and enduring bombarding from the German planes coming over, parents trying to protect the children with their own bodies, and actually we had nowhere to go. We just went back home. I do not want to go into feeling of despair. I really had to sit down and meditate in order to come back to my senses. I remember what Mahatma Gandhi said. When I despair, I remember that all through history, the way of truth and love always won. There have been tyrants and murderers, and for a time they seem invincible. But in the end, they always fall. Think of it, always. The actual situation is a danger for our whole world. That is why Gandhi's message is more important than ever. So you all heard about my childhood during the war. So here I'm going to talk of what happened on D-Day. Our hope and expectations when we heard about the D-Day in Normandy, and we were absolutely sure that we would be liberated immediately. I told you about Arthur Seyss-Inquart, who became the governor of the Netherlands, who was later sentenced in Nuremberg. Here you see him with Hitler. And here you see the formidable war apparatus of the Germans. And those Nazi soldiers in Aller Street. And Joseph Goebbels, who was the propaganda minister, and he took care of all the broadcasting, everything, as well in Germany as in the occupied countries. It did not come all at once. It did not start with concentration camps and all that. In the beginning, we had even no idea that happened. We always thought it will go back to normal, which never happened, of course. In the very beginning, the Nazis took prominent Dutch citizens and took them as hostages. I remember that we asked my parents, what is a hostage? Well, those were permanent citizens, and as soon as the resistance committed an act of sabotage against the Nazis, they shot them. Just as an example for the population not to do anything against Nazis. Among the hostages that they murdered was the Baron von Heemstede. He was Audrey Hepburn's beloved uncle with whom she lived. So, the massive deportation of Jews. The Netherlands had one of the most numerous contingents of Jewish people. Since early centuries, we had a reputation of tolerance. Sephardic Jews and New Christians fleeing the Inquisition or persecution in their own countries, all could find refuge in the lowlands. Yeah, and Hitler promised to make Europe and the world free of Jews. One of my friends saw in a museum in Mexico City a saying of Hitler. He said, "Burning hate. I want my people burn with hate. Hate against the Jews." That's one of the strongest energies to make people to brainwash the people. Here you see a lot of wedding bands that were removed from the Holocaust survivors. I also have pictures about mountains of human shoes, human hair, clothes, everything that has been taken away to make sure that they did not consider themselves as individuals anymore. This is the school in our own street who became the headquarters of the Gestapo, and that many Dutch resistants have been tortured there. And my father and the Jewish people who were at our house when they came to get them went to that place before they were put on a transport to a concentration camp. Those were the Dutch traitors I was telling about. They called themselves the NSB, the National Socialist Bond, telling us that they were the only real patriots, the only ones who cared about the people and the country. We hated them even more than the invaders. And after the war, we made sure that they were rounded up, and we had to stand their arrogance for 5 years. But after the war, they were rounded up, they were judged at a special tribunal, and many of them put in jail or even sentenced to death. I want to relate here the story of the martyr village in France. Not only because it's a story that had to be told, but it fits in the whole D-Day. Oradour-sur-Glane was a village in France, and on June 10, 1944, after resistance committed an act of sabotage against the Nazis already furious because D-Day had happened, they raided the village. All the men were assembled in a grange, and the Nazis shot them in their legs and their feet so they could not walk away. The two priests and after all the men were shot in their legs, they put fire on the grange and burned them. The two priests who were in that village took all the women and children to the church in order to keep them safe. But after the grange was burned, they also put fire on the church. In all, there were probably 2 or 3 people who escaped to tell the story. And until today, the site is kept without modification for the world to see what happened there, an example of the extreme cruelty of the Nazis. All around those ruins and the burned buildings, you still can feel the fear and agony of the people who perished there. On June 6, 1944, D-Day, the heroic invasion of Normandy, most of the soldiers of the first landing craft did not make it to the end of the day. Did not make it further than the beach, and did not leave to see anything else. Look at those young faces. Many of them lied about their age because they wanted to go fight. They paid the ultimate price for our freedom and gave their lives fighting Hitler and the Nazis. Today, some people call those they don't like Nazis or Hitler, only who never experienced the terror of the Nazis, uses such an absurd narrative. Crazy Tuesday. We called Crazy Tuesday September 6th, 1944, because we thought that we would be liberated very soon. And the Dutch started celebrating in the streets, we started dancing. The Germans were concerned. Seyss-Inquart even sent his wife back to Germany. But when they perceived that the liberation would not happen immediately, they came back with vengeance, and meaner than ever. And the wars had still to come. We had to wait 8 months and survive the hunger winter before the Allied troop reached the north of Holland. After many difficult situations they had in France, the farms, the hedges, tank barriers and all that, and 2 of the most terrible battles they had to fight. The winter of 1944 was the coldest on record, and the Battle of the Bulge, or Battle of the Ardennes, was the last German offensive on the Western Front, an unsuccessful attempt to divide the Allied forces and prevent an invasion of Germany. The bulge refers to the wedge that the Germans drove in the Allied lines. The courage of the Allied soldiers, British, Canadians, and Americans, was tested against great adversity. The Allies suffered some 75,000 casualties in the Battle of the Bulge, but the Germans lost between 80,000 and 100,000. The German strength had been irredeemably impaired by the Allied forces. And by the end of January 45, American units had taken all the ground they had lost, and the defeat of Germany was clearly only a question of time. The town of Bastogne in Belgium still has an American tank. Here you see the Battle of the Bulge in the bitter cold. This was the battle final. But the town of Bastogne in Belgium still has an American tank as a monument to our liberators. The Battle of Arnhem, known by the movie One Bridge Too Far, was a battle of the vanguard of the Allied Operation Market Garden. It aimed to secure the bridges over the big rivers Meuse, Waal, and Rhine in the Netherlands in order to outflank the heavy German defense and to ensure a swift advance toward Berlin. It was fought in and around the Dutch city of Arnhem, where Audrey Hepburn lived with her relatives. The towns and the villages in that vicinity of Arnhem had an enormous number of casualties and destruction. So that was the One Bridge Too Far story. On May 5th, 1945, liberation of the Netherlands. I already told you the joy of the Dutch people, dancing in the streets, greeting the liberators. On the bottom here, right, you can see the Dutch people with their former hidden radio hearing about Hitler's death. They were joyous about it, of course. And as I said, the immeasurable sacrifice of American and other Allied armies is terrible. Thousands of young lives, maybe many of them stayed behind the endless fields of white crosses, as far as the eye can see. Not only in the Netherlands, but all over Europe. More than 1,800 crosses only in one cemetery in the Netherlands, and even you see crosses with the David Star where Jewish soldiers had been killed. Ben Ferrings, the last Nuremberg prosecutor, said that wars make murderers out of otherwise decent people. When I did this presentation at the Passport Club of Amador, one of the members, Paul Carnasi, said, I was at that cemetery. And he showed me the pictures of him in his beautiful uniform. And I remember when the Americans came in, our clothes were ragged, terrible. We saw those Americans with their beautiful uniforms. It was something, I never can forget this. And I saw Paul Carnasi with his beautiful uniform, so I wanted to make him part of this presentation. This is a memorial at the Field of Honor in Lunen. That's where the foundation of war sepulchres brought back the remains of the people from the concentration camps. At one of the last commemorations, where they invite Canadians, British, and Americans, one Canadian asked, why you Dutch, after so many years, make such a big thing about this? To which the mayor of Arnhem replied, one must have lived under the terror of Nazi regime to really understand the meaning and importance of freedom. We never will forget our liberators and never will thank them enough. Here you see school children taking care of the graves. They always involve the children. They even have special tours of the children. Don't let them forget. So, last year, I had the honor to be invited by Professor Clifford Lester, who has a gallery of Holocaust survivors in Cyprus, at the University of Cyprus. He wanted to come to Montgomery Hill and interview me. I told him, I am not a Holocaust survivor. He said, no, let me tell you why. He said, my mother, Jewish girl, lived in Amsterdam, was part of Anne Frank's friends, and she survived the war because she had been hidden by a Dutch family like yours. I will be forever grateful. So he put me in his Holocaust gallery as the righteous among the nations. I said, I will consider that as homage to my father. Mm. It's irrelevant. Okay, in 2022, I participated at the Memorial Day celebration in Houston. Martha took me there, remembering. That was organized by the military. Originally, there were 4 World War II survivors. There was a Holocaust survivor, 2 military, and me. And then they had to postpone the whole thing because of COVID. So when they came back to me 2 years later, the Holocaust survivor had died, one of the military had died, the other one was so sick that he had to be represented by his daughter. I was the only World War II element available. So when I made my speech, talking about the sacrifice of Americans, and we never forget and all that, after my speech, they played Schindler's List. The military organized well those things. It was very, very emotional. And a little veteran guy came to me, he hugged me with emotion. He said, my father was in World War II. And I thank you so much for doing this. And then, you can see the picture here, he took his Purple Heart and handed it to me. I said, sir, that is beautiful. You earned that. I cannot accept it. He said, I want you to have it. So I put the Purple Heart with his picture in a little silver frame. It was incredible. That was I was moved to tears that he did that. Yeah, between the European countries, Belgium, Netherlands, France, United Kingdom, and Italy, there were at least 20 American cemeteries with a grave of 104,500 casualties. The wages of war are heavy. They are paid in blood, tears, and body bags. Loved ones in their prime, no matter how courageous and brave they were, come home in flag-draped coffins. We have to think about it. When the war happened in Ukraine, at the Field of Honor in Lunen, sent me a message that they had. And they said, on the Field of Honor in Lunen, you find solidified sadness and tears in the stones marking the graves of war victims. Here it becomes tangible what wars do to humans. At this very moment, with another cruel conflict raging, we invite everybody to come together on these memorial days of 4 and 5 May, especially our youngsters who for the first time in their lives are confronted with a war in Europe that touches everybody. Let us stand together in silence, striving together for freedom and democracy, remembering together the immeasurable sacrifice, number of war victims, and show compassion to the ones who have to go on living without their loved ones. Our common denominator is the rejection of wars and the sadness for those many prematurely interrupted lives. Let us ornate their graves with our love and flowers. Thank you.